Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
I am doing well.
Good.
We're going to do this program a little differently. You know, essentially for months now, we've been talking about one issue. And we still will talk about it today because that's what people want to know about. And that is, of course, the lockdowns with coronaviruses, the lack of value for masks and social distancing and all that. We will talk about that with regards to what's going on in Florida, which is an astounding story on that. But there's another story today that got my attention. We've talked about this, Daniel, mainly because we've worked on this issue together for a long time during the early part of this century, because it went on and still going on in a way because we're still involved in Iraq, trying to get the troops out and get people to stop. And how do you direct a president to deal with the troops? Because it becomes a technical issue. Can you just tell the president what to do with the troops? And we were very, very cautious about that, never giving direct orders to the president, do this, do that. The Congress has the power of the purse, but they shouldn't be telling the president what to do with troops. This has come up before since Trump was in. 2018 it came up, and the Congress was wanting to tell him what to do with troop movements. He can't bring troops out, but he made the point even then, which I agree with him, that it's a presidential function to be in charge of the military, especially in time of military action. It gets a little bit more confusing because that was written mainly during a time of war, so we only have pseudo wars, and so it confuses the technique on how you do this legislatively. But it's been around, and we worked on this, and presidents generally do exactly what they want. But what the Congress is trying to do now, Pelosi with her Republican allies who are the warmongers, and they would like to say that Trump has a lot of nerve wanting to bring the troops home. In various places, Afghanistan's the big issue right now. He's talked about it and moved troops around in Syria. So it's been used. We have those troops, and he has his arguments, we have ours, but he still has some authority to do that. But this is the big thing now, to try to curtail any apparent success for Trump, because I think he sincerely believes this. He talked about it when he was in campaigning and not doing all that well. He talked about how terrible those wars were, why we got stuck with them. So he's been pretty consistent on that. So he's now fighting this condition that they want to put on there and say you can't take the troops out. I think it's ironic. They send in troops without proper authority, but then when a president wants to remove the troops, then the Congress comes down, which should be allowed, and then they say, oh, no, you have to have proper authority. You have to get permission from us. So it's sort of a bit of irony there, and that's just how the legislative system works. It's convenience, and even this, even though I do give Trump credit for having some instincts that he would like to see less of our troops overseas and our allies paying for more, but like so many things, like coronavirus and everything else, I think, it's the anti-Trump sentiment. Anything we can do to embarrass him. I think these lockdowns, that what they, want to renew these lockdowns, that's going to hurt the economy. Yeah, that's what we want. Then Trump will look bad. Oh, we'll take care of it when you elect Biden president, and he's going to revive the economy and get all the credit for it, that sort of thing. But I thought this would be a good thing to refresh our memory on this. It's ongoing, but it's an interesting legislative thing. Sometimes they put it in and they sort of have a loophole where it's just a statement of position, but it doesn't have any authority. You'd have to, if you're going into a place, it has to be a clear declaration. But getting out, I think finally there was a defunding of Vietnam. I think that's finally what brought the Vietnam War to an end.
Yeah, the problem is, as you say, the problem is the lack of a war declaration. And I think Congress does like it this way, and we've talked about it before. You know it well, because they're not on the hook if things go badly. Hey, you guys declared the war, but they can also wiggle around pretending to be the executive branch, pretending to be the backseat generals, the Monday morning quarterbacks, trying to move troops around in a way that really is not constitutional. If a war was properly declared, there would be no question that the president is the commander-in-chief and has a constitutional authority to move troops as he wished. And that's why you are pushing declaration of war on Iraq, because we want to trigger the Constitution. And remember what they told you, Ron, this part of the Constitution is anachronistic.
Don't bring that stuff up.
Don't bring that up. But that's why they wanted it that way. That's why they wanted to do it. And I remember back in that time, because I was doing your foreign policy, and there were oftentimes you were disappointed because, of course, you were against the surge in 07, you were against the war in the beginning, and sometimes our friends, especially when the Democrats held Congress, we had a lot of allies in the Democratic Party against the war, and sometimes they would come up with a resolution that was probably well-meaning, but it tended to go overboard and to push the president, even though you don't like a strong president beyond the Constitution, but within his constitutional balance. And so we would try to tinker with it and say, hey, can you change this a little bit and make it more about the appropriation of funds, the authorization of funds, which is what Congress has the power. And so this is kind of that. This is all the bad things back then that you would have rejected, now coming back in a bipartisan way.
Isn't it interesting? We were working on a bipartisan group to prevent this from happening and going in. Now they've turned around and say, oh, we're bipartisan. We're going to work with the Democrats, and the Democrats are going to do this to keep them there.
Keep them there.
You know? So, and that's their big purpose. But it's also, I think there's a deep state influence in this about where we are, and the deep state certainly wouldn't agree with Trump on his foreign policy. And it's something that I think is very important, because it has to do with our empire, you know, and how you best protect the empire. And the empire means protecting the reserve currency of the world, protecting enough power to issue sanctions. So this whole thing, since they'll never be satisfied no matter what Trump would do, the only thing they can do is what they tried to do and failed when they tried to prevent his election. And this is the thing they need the power. It's a power struggle, and that's why this election is a big deal. And it can get, I imagine it's going to get pretty nasty before it's all over. So, but the unfortunate thing, though, if you want to be a little bit cynical, you might say, yeah, really, what does it matter? It seems like even the Trumps versus the Pelosi's and all this, the deep state's still, you know, pretty powerful. Long term, the policies don't change. Even though right here, this looks like they're not faking the disagreement. I think that they honestly want to, but it's more for power than bringing us home, you know, or keeping us in those places. So, and it certainly is never a money policy. I mean, the way they pass out money, they're not going to take any money away from the military-industrial complex. And there's a bill coming up. The NDAA is up, and they're trying to put this in here. And whether they put something in with teeth, or whether they just make a public relations statement that we don't like what Trump's doing, it remains to be seen.
It remains to be seen. And we're not, Trump is no peacenik. He's busy rattling sabers in the South China Sea, so we're not here saying, hey, we got our peace candidate. But the fact is that Washington needs war to survive, you know, and that's one of the reasons we always hold our conferences in Washington. Sadly, this year, thanks a lot, guys, we can't. But we hold it there because we want to be in their face, because this is where all the money is made, the war machine is made, where all the donations to politicians are made from the war machine. And that's why it's a bipartisan thing, because it's about money and power. But what they're talking about is not only Afghanistan, but also Syria, South Korea, and even Germany, where Trump wants to pull troops back. They want to block it. And what they do is that and this is what they did in 07, to clarify a little bit more what we said earlier, rather than explicitly blocking the funds, it was what they did in 07, because they didn't want to look like they weren't for the troops, they demand a series of benchmarks, and that's what they're doing now. Oh, okay, well, you can't pull out the troops until this, and this benchmark is met. And they're policy benchmarks, they're artificial benchmarks, and it really goes beyond what they should be doing in Congress. But something jumped out at me in this article, and we saw it on Defense One, which is a generally pro-military industrial complex website, but it does have good writing and good articles. But this is Professor John Owen, and I'll read this quote because I'm sure you'll have something to say on it. The head of the University of Virginia's Department of Politics. And he kind of gets Trump right, but he doesn't exactly see why, I don't think. And it's sort of a critique. Quote, Trump is not a strategic thinker, but he has some instincts that have been consistent. One of those is that the U.S. has fought a lot of worthless wars, in particular Iraq and Afghanistan, and the second is that the U.S. is being exploited by free-riding allies. The problem is he has very few in Congress who agree with him. True, true, and true. Wow. But the one point is, in the beginning, he is right, but that is how Trump got elected. That's what got him elected.
Right, and he's safe there, and I think he's made an effort, but there's also some very powerful things happening in what he can do. And like you say, he's not exactly with us on foreign policy, but I think he should get the encouragement for this, these troop movements. He's in charge of it. The Congress, unfortunately, sets it up and allows it to happen, allows these pseudo wars to occur, and that's the way it's been run for a long time. But you know, even there's another person that wrote a book recently, and you will never guess. I think the guy's name was John Bolton. He had a little book. Do you know that he's on the side of being anti-Trump? He doesn't think that Trump should be able to bring troops home. That's the worst thing from his opinion that we should allow the president to do.
Yeah,
but constitutionally, he does have the right, especially even if it's a declared war. You can't tell the president how to maneuver the troops. I mean, like after World War II broke out simultaneously with Japan and Europe, and since it's been considered and is a real war, it can't be micromanaged. Somebody's going to have to make a decision if you want to win the war. In this case, though, it's so different, and we've already said this. This is one of the flaws in what they're trying to do: manage a war that's not a war, and doing it without a blatant violation of the Constitution.
Yeah. Just as a footnote, I don't know if you noticed this. I wonder what the media is going to make of it. Did you see that Jeff Sessions was defeated in his primary
I did see that.
against a Trump-backed candidate? And Sessions is really key in the beginning of the Russiagate. He's the one who recused himself from it for very dubious reasons. So I don't know what it means, but it's interesting. But so we'll follow this and we'll see what happens. We'll see if Trump's able to persevere, or even if he wants to. But switch over to something that we've been covering for a while, Dr. Paul, and that's the critical issue of Florida and Texas, and to a lesser extent Arizona, which are grabbing the headlines. In fact, let's look at this first clip. This is the scare headlines of the week. Florida surpasses 77,000 COVID-19 cases, 2,900 deaths, health officials say. This is the scare quotes, and you'll see it everywhere from Drudge to every one of these news outlets that are obsessed with this. But what's fascinating, and I saw this last week, and I didn't really say anything because I just wasn't sure and I didn't want to bring it up. But let's look at that next clip. This is a Twitter account, Rebel Cole, who first brought this up back on July 11th. This is a scandal begging for press coverage. 333 Florida COVID testing labs have reported 100% positive tests in the state report for 3,528 tests. That's 34% of today's 10,360 new cases. And that is fascinating. I've been watching it to see if anything comes of this. And let's look at the next clip, because something did come of it. Fox 35 investigated. Florida Department of Health says that some labs have not reported negative COVID cases, which is not the entire truth, because what happened is they made some massive bungles, and I'll turn it back to you, but I'll just point out one. Orlando Health had a 98% positivity rate, but Fox 35, to their credit, they went and investigated. They contacted the hospital, and they confirmed the errors. Orlando Health said, well, actually, it's not 98% positivity. It's only 9.4%.
Yeah, and my first reaction was that, okay, if you've done 100 tests and it's 60-40 or something, that they might just, if the negatives were 40, they would just ignore it or something like that. But literally, there's one of the articles reported that they don't just forget them; they combine them.
Yeah.
And then there's no if they did 100 tests, they had 100 positive. You wonder why they even They probably don't run the test. They probably save the money or something else. But the other thing politically is interesting is DeSantis. I think that's his name, the governor of Florida. He's pretty good on this. So the Florida Department of Health is the one that's been involved in this. So I cannot believe that he would be part of this. I think that there's probably I guess in a system that we have today in the world, I mean, most of the time we can identify the Democrats in Chicago and Detroit, but down here, so there must be spies and infiltrators to pull this off. But this seems to be so extremely bad in many ways, bad, stupid, and bad policy that they've still done this, and because it seems like they should expect to be caught by this. But what the best thing that we can get out of this is people should lose confidence in these tests and these reports, which is about what we spend most of our time on. We hear a thing, and there's another side to the statistics that we have, and this certainly is a side that they're not going to hear about. There's some coverage on this. I think the fact that Fox covered this is, I think, very good, but it's not going to change policy. I just hope it changes some attitudes from people, because it just really bugs me when the people just are rote, and they just bow down and crawl, and they say, get a test, get a test. What do you need a test for? And they'll line up. Wasn't there a story they waited 7 hours to get a test?
Crazy.
And then what are they going to do with the test? It doesn't matter. If even it's negative, we're going to call you positive. And it's just way too much government and too much dependency. And it wouldn't be so bad if they were doing it and everybody recognized this and just dismissed them. That's what finally happened in the Soviet system. Everybody knew what they were doing, so nobody believed what they say. But we still have people easily terrified from this. And yet, even with my negative impression of all this, I still give a lot of people a pass, because I say, they hear people getting sick, people can die from this, and you guys are just, endangering the world by doing this. But there's a lot more to it than simply saying that you have to lie to us about what's going on. And we can worry about the virus and the danger of it, but in a proper perspective. But to turn it around and say it requires us to do something we have never done before, and that's the lockdown. And now the stories you read, lockdown's probably going to kill more people than the coronavirus. And it may have already happened, but it's just, once again, how are these problems solved? Is it centrally by politicians and bureaucrats and money grabbers and all these things? And then there will be an incentive to make things worse and use it for political reason. So it is a mess, and I think it's an outgrowth of the fact that our country is bankrupt. I wrote that little article a while ago. We're bankrupt. Financially, we're bankrupt, and morally, we're bankrupt. So this invites this, and I think the disgust with what's happening invites the extremists to get in office, and they're there, and who knows? I think this is an important election. Not that I think the Congress can change the country. The country has to change the Congress, but what if they get 10 more dedicated Marxists in there? That would be a bad sign, I tell you.
Well, 40 million people out of work in the U.S. over a bad cold season, a bad flu season. That says a lot. But I'm going to go back to it again. Florida and Texas are in play for Biden, and I think that is the core of what's happening here. I really do. You're seeing it in both places. Trump is, according to what we saw last week, polls, whatever, but 5 points down in Texas. That's critical. But here's a little more from the article, the Fox 35, just a couple more, because it wasn't just that one anecdotal. Report also showed that Orlando Veterans Medical Center had a positivity rate of 76%. A spokesperson told Fox 35 Tuesday that doesn't reflect their numbers, and the positivity rate is actually 6%. And remember, the positivity rates have been used by Abbott here in Texas and probably in Florida. That positivity percentage is so high, we got to close it down. They're trying to use that. Don't worry about cases, don't worry about deaths. The positivity is so high, we got to close it down. So they're using that to do that, and it's dangerous. Let's go to the next quote. I'm going to go through a couple more things about Florida, Dr. Paul, and here's the truth, Rebel Cole again. This is updated yesterday, July 14th. Here's the truth in Florida, above all the scare headlines. Today's occupancy, all beds 78.7, ICU beds 81.3. A week ago, all beds 79.3, ICU beds 82.1. They actually lower occupancy this week than last week, despite the fact that the so-called cases are up 72%. It's having a minimal impact on bed availability. Those blue lines you see on top of that graph on the bottom, the left is all beds, the right are ICU beds. Plenty of blue left in both of that. So it is a hype that we're seeing. And let's look at one more. This is really dramatic, Dr. Paul. These are cases versus deaths by date of reporting. The blue are the cases, and the other three are deaths offset 14, 21, and 28 days from that. You would expect, if you're really seeing a second wave or a surge, you should have a huge increase in these deaths being reported, and it's just not happening. So let's look at the next one, though. Just want to go through this really quick. We have that next one. Here's our good friend Thomas Massey. He always brings us some words of wisdom. And this goes along with what we're saying. I've been informed of a case in Kentucky where a student tested positive but then tested negative 3 times on 3 consecutive days. So almost certainly a false positive. But it was listed as a COVID recovered, and the health department refuses to report it as otherwise. And Massey went on to say, so the question is nationwide, how many false positives are categorized as COVID recoveries, and how does one have this amended on one's medical record, et cetera, et cetera? So he's seeing a lot of this as well.
You know, we get the edicts from the mayors and the county commissioners and county judges and from the governors, and the question that always comes up, and it lingers because I don't think we can have an absolute answer to it. Is it all designed by very, very efficient conspirators getting together and saying, well, this is what we have to do, and here, Governor, this is what you're going to have next week. Get prepared because we do need the lockdown, and it's going to be very, very important. And, you know, you might say, well, yeah, maybe that's the way it works in Chicago or someplace else. But is it... Are they capable of doing this and having everybody just chime in? Or is it more like, I'm sure there's some of this too, is people just get very fearful of it, you know, and they don't have, they're not looking at it scientifically. They look at it politically, and they look at it emotionally of the fear of saying, you know, what happens? You know, they've said, you know, if you have this football stadium over next week, there's going to be 150 people die from this, you know, and all of a sudden it puts this burden on the governor to close down because he doesn't want to get blamed with it. So it's this political shenanigans going on. It's misinformation. So I imagine they work together, is my guess, is that there are some people who are pulling the strings, and they know exactly what they're doing. But I think a lot of people that go along, you know, every mayor, you know, he says, I read it, it sounds horrible, people are going to die, and I don't want to be responsible for anybody. I'm going to vote for lockdown. But nobody will die from lockdown. They just get a vacation. Sure, it would destroy thousands, if not tens of thousands of people's livelihood, and a lot of sickness and illnesses and a lot of deaths come from it too.
That's right. Well, I'm going to close out with a good news story because that's how I am. Let's look at that last clip, and this is going to warm your heart. Quarantines or not, Americans descend on summer vacation spots. And this goes with the theme that you've always said, no matter how miserable they try to make life for Americans, they'll find a way. They'll break into a park and let their kids play. They'll go to an underground restaurant. Though my dad was saying he went to a speakeasy barber yesterday to get his hair cut in California. He had to knock on the door and they look through and let you in. Here's what's happening in America. If Americans were terrified of coronavirus, they wouldn't be defying all efforts to make it unpleasant and impossible to vacation and actually going out on vacation. And that's what they're doing. Here's a little quote from the article, Dr. Paul. You'll be proud. This is a fellow Texan. I think it's bull blank, 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 quote unquote. They're saying the mask should work, so why should you be quarantined, said Chris Fry, 59, a feed company manager from Dimmitt, Texas, staying in his cabin near Red River. 45-minute drive south in Taos Plaza, Louisiana tourist Christy Brazel was frustrated. They're taking away our liberty, she said, and we're going to defy them and go out on vacation. So hats off to the
you
Americans that
go.
are defying that.
And I think if the people had the ability to make their own choices, which is what it's like, if we ever see a free society again, people make decisions about their health and we're taking risks and everything that they do. But there was one report, it's been a month or so ago, early on, and I don't know where it stands right now, but there were the cruise liners, they really, really got hit. And they started signing people up for like a September cruise or something, and they had like 2 or 3 times more people than they needed. And I thought, wow, they're confident. I imagine they've been able to, have another siege of infections and knock it down, or somebody's going to write some rules, because that wouldn't be good. But I think that was the instinct, having a good time and forget it. This is, we'll get over this. That's generally what happens with these infections. They don't last forever. But that's about where we are today, as they get more and more people convinced that they have to be cautious about all the announcement on how horrible it is. And the horrible stuff here is mainly the way they're presenting it. It's mainly the politicians who are trying to terrify people so that they can install and instill in people regulations they wouldn't ever want to consider. I think it is astounding to see tens of thousands, if not millions of people walking around with a mask on in conditions that are so unnecessary. And now the evidence is coming out that the mask is dangerous. It's dangerous to a person's health, and yet they keep doing it. So hopefully the people will wake up. Of course, the challenge is, does that mean that there is no more chance that anybody can get sick? No, there is a chance. But there's a chance that if we continue to do what we do, we're going to have more things like dumping people into nursing homes and have them get more infected. And there's chances that we'll deceive people by saying that they have the virus and they don't, and terrify them and have them in lockdown. This self locking down, is disrupting a lot of people's lives, and it's very, very costly. So I think the bottom line is, what we should seek, and hopefully that's what people see us trying to do, is to seek the truth of things. Find out who's telling the truth and do our best, both emotionally, politically, and medically, and come up with an answer. And guess what will happen if we had the chance to do that? It would still be imperfect. But believe me, if you depend on the authoritarians in Congress and in Washington, around the world, in the media, it is going to be so much worse. So I'm putting my cards with the people who make their own decisions and living with the decisions they make. And believe me, I think it would be a better world. At least there would be a lot more self-respect. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.